Yeah, hello and welcome back to my channel. Today's topic is still about value-added tax and it's still related to vouchers, although it's not about vouchers themselves. It's about coupons which entitle you to a refund or a reduction of the price. And so we are going to have a look on these things. Here you see again a short overview where we are. So after talking about the different kind of vouchers, now the last step we talk about is non-vouchers or coupons for price reductions. What is it what we mean? So sometimes a firm gives out coupons which their customers can hand in and which then entitle to a reduction of the price or to a refund of the price. And you might imagine, and you have even often seen that if you buy a package of cornflakes or of sweets or something like that, there might be some stamp or coupon printed on the package, which you can cut out and then hand in or send in to the producer's firm. And you get, if you collected enough of them, then you get a refund. So this is how you must imagine the situation here is a package of Sweetie Sweets. And I honestly hope that I don't violate any trademark, and I hope that this trademark doesn't exist anywhere in the world. At least that's what I assume. So Sweetie Sweets now has something here which is called a voucher. That's their first mistake, because we would call it a coupon because yeah, but if you hand that in, you get 50 cents back per coupon. Um, According to our rules, and that is why I want to still underline that, this is neither a single purpose voucher nor a multiple purpose voucher, because this small piece of paper doesn't entitle you to receive a service or a good. It entitles you just to a monetary payment or to a price reduction. So what we defined as a voucher, that was something which entitled you to receive a good or service for free or for a reduced price. This now just entitles you to money. And so it just embodies a discount or a rebate or a refund. That's the basic difference. Now let's remember what the basic rule for discounts and rebates and all that thing is. They just lower the tax base. Remember, the basic rule for the tax base was the tax base is all what the entrepreneur receives for his delivery or service, naturally minus the VAT amount included in that gross amount. And the most important thing is it does not count what you officially agree on, but the formula here says everything which he receives, and that means which he actually receives. So if due to a discount or a refund or anything like that, the entrepreneur finally receives less than originally agreed upon, then this actual amount is everything which counts for VAT in the long run. So if you issue a coupon for a discount of €5 for free, and a customer shows up and hands that coupon in, you sell him something officially for a price of 50, he hands in that coupon, €5, so he only needs to pay 45, and everything which you got was basically only 45 plus a worthless piece of paper, which you gave away for free. So all what the entrepreneur receives is 45 in that case and nothing more. So that's the gross tax base. As you additionally remember, I hope at least you remember that, if the price is paid in several payments, so several installments or at different points of time, that doesn't matter at all, because the tax base is defined as all what the entrepreneur gets. That means from now on till the end of eternity. So if you can foresee for future payments originally due to your agreements, then the tax base is everything which is foreseeable. So if you sold something and said, I get in the first installment of 1,000, then again 1,000, and again 1,000, then the tax base is from the beginning on 3,000. All what you will receive from now on till the end of eternity. And you also know that if you have to give back a part of that money, this would also influence all what you receive. So if the agreement is you get 1,000, you get another 1,000, you get another 1,000, and then surprisingly you have to give back 500 because let's say your customer makes a complaint and you have to accept it and say, oh yeah, that's a problem because I have to lower the price, otherwise that will be bad for my reputation. However, whatever happens in that case, the total of all what you receive actually is 2.5. So that's the tax base. So negative payments also influence the tax base because they are a part of all what you receive. You probably remember that if that last amount is not certain, so if you hand back the 500 due to a complaint which you originally not foresaw, then naturally the tax base changes. Originally you expected to get 3,000, now it drops down to 2.5. That's a change in the tax base, and that change in the tax base will only be declared and processed by the fisc at the moment when the change happens. So in this situation, you would originally declare 3,000 tax base, pay the tax on it, and when the refund is made, 500, you would declare this as a negative net amount and the corresponding negative net tax. So if a refund has to be made, then making that refund is an event of that preliminary tax declaration period only during which it happens. You don't have a retroactive correction of the original payment or tax. In case of our price refund coupon, that has consequences because when you print such a package with a refund coupon printed on top, you don't know when the customer hands it in and if at all. So originally, if you sell that Sweetie Sweets package for 20 euro, which is, by the way, far too expensive, then originally the price is 20. And if and when the customer sends in the refund coupon, then the price drops down by 1 euro, but only then. If it happens, and when it happens, the total tax base drops down to 19 euro gross amount. So in the course of time, you would originally have a tax base of 20 euro gross amount, or to be correct, on exact, the net amount which corresponds to 20 euro. Then you would have a negative tax base and a negative tax in August, and that together would end up in the 19 euro and the corresponding tax. So that's how that happens in the course of time. So the refund coupon only takes effect when it's handed in and the money paid back. Just to make things complete, let me remind you of another aspect. If you have a transaction between two entrepreneurs, the output tax of the seller is the input tax of the buyer. So if now the output tax goes down due to a complaint, a refund, or anything else which lowers the tax base, then also the buyer has to lower his input tax refund claim. And also that happens in the moment when the change happens. So a correction of the output tax in case of the seller, for example, due to a refund coupon handed in, also would lead to a reduction of input tax for the customer if the customer is also an entrepreneur. So the input tax situation would be for the customer if he is also an entrepreneur. First, in the first moment he could claim the full input tax from the 20, that would be 100 out of 119. No, 9, no, this is the tax base. So 19% out of this amount here. Then the tax base drops down by 100 out of 119 times €1 when the coupon is handed in. Now you will probably think, that's not very frequent. Indeed it is. But you might imagine a hotel where they buy a huge amount of cornflakes and other things, or of these sweetie sweets for preparation of breakfast for the consumers, for their guests. So they buy this stuff for enterprise purposes of them, and so they would be entitled to input tax refund. And naturally, they might be keen on the money, careful with money, good merchants, so they would collect these refund coupons, and if they have a huge amount of them, they send them in, collect the refund, and then their input tax claim would also drop down. So in that case, their base for the input tax would also drop down to 100 out of 119 of €19. So that's corresponding to what happens on the side of the seller. So in June, the full amount drop down of the input tax in August. So there you have a negative input tax. So you have to give back, let's say, probably some 16 cents to the fiscal administration due to your tax base, your price went down. Okay. Yeah. There is some other aspect which you need to keep in mind when it comes to the tax base, because you probably remember that the tax base not only includes the amounts which are paid by the customer, but additionally amounts paid by a third person to pay out to fill up the price are also a part of all what the entrepreneur receives for the delivery or service. So the basic equation for the tax base is completely as follows. The tax base is made up by payments by the customer himself plus payments by others as a consideration for that delivery or service. Now, when we take into account that the tax base can also be made up partially by negative amounts, then we can also not be surprised that we could say a payment made by others could also a negative one. So if our refund coupon is not paid out to the customer, but to a third person who hands in that refund coupon, this would not change the situation. We would, for example, then have a negative amount of money paid to a third person just because of the transaction. So the tax base would be made up by payment made by customer minus refund made to some other person. For example, it's not the customer himself, but wife or child who hands in the refund coupon, the price reduction coupon. So then that can't be a change. However, you need to be cautious that the payment which you make to somebody else is not a remuneration for something which the other person does for you. So not for brokering services, you get a refund or you get money as a third person if you motivated somebody to conclude the contract with the seller, because that would be intermediary services, agency services, brokering, or however you call it. The negative payments or the refund must only be caused by the sale or the service. However, if that is the case, that would be not a surprise and not a fundamental change to the original formula. So let's go back to the simple case that the customer's wife or child sends in the refund coupon. Then the tax base is indeed tax base €20 first, and then refund €1, tax base drops down. The one thing happens in June and is to be taxed in June, and the negative element is showing up only in August when the coupon is sent in and paid out. Good. As I mentioned already, such a refund made to a third person must surely, or you must make sure that it is not paid for something else than the underlying purchase of the good or service in question. Um, so no brokering services, no other services made by the third person to the seller, but just because of the underlying sale. So if you can find any other reason for that payment, it's no longer a negative compound of the tax base. So let's sum up what we have found out until now. If a refund coupon is used, the tax base is just lowered. If the tax base was first higher, then handing in the coupon at a later date just leads to a reduction, which falls under the rules of paragraph 17 USDG. So the negative component is just declared in the period when this happens. So you have a kind of a negative tax which is caused. And if the refund coupon is paid out to a third person, then this is a negative amount paid by, so to a third person, if there is no other imaginable reason for that payment to the third person than the purchase of the product or the price as a service. So let's begin to apply these rules to cases. When we have a simple case, now we can imagine the following. A sells to B a product for 20 euro, and there is a refund coupon about 1 euro, which is later handed in by B. B is a consumer, so no input tax problem. The gross amount of the price goes down by 1 euro when B hands in, so the gross amount is first 20 euro and later drops down by 1 euro to 19. So the one happens in June and is taxed in June, and the negative elements are declared and are cashed back from the fisc in August. As B is not an entrepreneur, we don't have any input tax drama to observe. Case number 2. A sells to B a product for 20, coupon of 1 euro is handed in later by B, and B is now a retailer or hotel owner or what else. So now we have an input tax problem. Gross price goes down by 1 euro when B hands in the coupons. The output tax for A goes down and correspondingly goes down the input tax claim for B. So B has to give back input tax in August partially to the fisc, because now VAT included in the price of the products which he bought is reduced, so his input tax claim reduces itself now, and if he claimed the input tax previously, then he has to give something back to the fisc. Good. More complex case. We have a chain of entrepreneurs. A sells his product for B to B for 10 euro plus VAT. B sells to C for 20 euro plus VAT. C sells to D for 30 euro plus VAT, and D is now very, very greedy. He sells to E for 50 euro plus VAT. On the package, there is still that coupon printed, and naturally nobody in the chain can cut out the coupon. That can only be done by the final consumer. So E cuts out from the package that coupon and sends it to A, and A then refunds 1 euro for each coupon which he receives by this way. So the situation is as follows. A sells to B and gets or has a right to get 10 euro plus VAT. B sells to C 20 euro plus VAT. C sells to D 30 euro plus VAT. B sells to final consumer E and gets 50 euro plus VAT. And now A pays a VAT to the fisc of 1 euro 90, 19% on 10. B has to pay 380 and gets an input tax of 190 from the price paid to A, so below the line pays another 1.90 euro to the fisc. The same for C, and D has to pay the VAT on 50 euro, that's 950, has an input tax claim of 570, so he pays 3 euro 80. And so the total amount of VAT paid in the chain is now, until now, €1.90 plus €1.90 plus €1.90 plus 3.80. So it's 9.50. So it's exactly 19% of €50. That is at the moment fully correct, because at the moment E paid €50. Perfect. Now the refund coupon for €1 is handed back by E to A, and A transfers €1 to plus VAT, by the way, to make things more easy. So A sends €1 back to the final consumer. That now means for A, the consideration which he gets for his product goes retroactively down by a negative payment made to a third person due to that transaction. So 19% on €1 are paid back. That's 19 cents. So that is what A now gets back from the fiscal administration. Everything else remains unchanged, because B has still paid €10 plus VAT. B still has an input tax of 19% on €10 and so on. So if we look to the total amount paid by E for the product, this is now only €49 because €1 was refunded. So the consume tax should be 19% on 49. The total amount of VAT paid in the chain is now surprisingly 190 minus 19 cents plus 190 plus 190 plus 380. So the total is now 950 minus 19 cents. That's €9.31, and that's exactly 90% of 49. So interestingly, D still pays the full amount of tax on what he gets, and the reduction becomes effective at the level of that person, A, who really takes care or grants that reduction. And if you go through the line, then the total, as you see, is the correct one. Although the distribution of payments within the chain is now a bit surprising, everybody ends up with a good and correct result. What happens if we have a variant of the same case? So customer E does not send the refund coupon to A, but A has agreed with subsequent traders that D accepts the refund coupon with a value of €1 as a means of payment for the purchase of the next package. And D then collects all these coupons and sends them to A in order to hand them in. So A pays out the value of the refund coupons to D. What changes? And the answer is nothing changes, because D still gets a total amount of €50 plus VAT for selling his product to E. He gets now 49 from the customer in cash and €1 from A as consideration, as a payment from a third party. So his full consideration is €50 plus VAT. D then hands over the price reduction coupon of €1 to his own supplier, C perhaps. And C gets 29 from customer D plus €1 from a third party, the person to whom he hands over that coupon. So all the prices in the chain would remain unchanged, and that means all the entrepreneurs can still deduct the full input tax if they hand through these coupons, and the coupons are always credited with the value of €1. The only modification would be that again A has a negative part of the consideration paid to a third party. That would namely be E again, probably. So A sells to B, B to C, and so on to E. These are the prices again, and what the people pay to the fisc on the first hand. So first we have €9.50, which is at the moment correct. Then the refund coupon, €1 plus VAT, is handed in by E to D. So what D basically now gets is 49 plus that piece of paper. So what the customer really pays is now dropping down to 49. However, what D gets is 49 plus a paper which entitles him to a payment from a third party amounting to €1 plus VAT. So D still gets the same amount basically below the line, although E pays less. D to C, the same. D pays only 29 in cash and hands over a piece of paper which entitles C to getting €1 from a third party. C passes on that piece of paper and only pays 19 in cash and €1 in form of the paper to B. B hands it over to A, and so the only modification which happens here is A gets less than €10 plus VAT in cash because he has to pay out or to credit now the €1 to B. So basically his output tax goes down by 19 cents and nothing else happens because everybody paid €10, 20, €30. They just changed the means of payments. They hand it in or they hand it on a paper with for somebody for which somebody else paid €1 to get it back. So in total, the VAT paid in the chain was 380, 190. So always a difference between output tax and input tax, 190, 190. And A now has originally paid 190 and now gets a price reduction of 19 cents when the coupon is handed in. So in total, we end up again with 19% on €49, which is nice. This system, by the way, would not work in a cross-border context because, let's say, if A lowers his cross price by €1, that basically means approximately 16 cents reduction of VAT. However, if E, the final consumer, doesn't pay or doesn't bear German VAT, but Swiss VAT or French VAT, then this system doesn't work. Because then what E basically saves is not the same amount as what A gets back when the coupon is handed in. So usually these coupon systems here can only work frictionlessly when it is a domestic case. That's the reason why very often these things are limited to the territory of one country or to sales which are made and are taxable and liable to tax within one country. So the fiscal administration of Germany usually demands that a price reduction coupon can only be seen as lowering the tax base of some earlier guy in the chain, let's say the producer of the package, if the final consumer lives in the same country as the producer. And if we have that information available, it can prove it. If you want to avoid these problems, naturally, you can design the whole campaign in a different way. You could make an agreement with all your entrepreneurs in the chain. I make a marketing campaign where I promise everybody who takes part in our marketing campaign now reduces the price by a given percentage for a limited period of time. And during that time, I also reduce my price to my customers, so to the retailers or wholesalers, by a corresponding percentage or something like that. In that case, you change the agreements of the civil law that everybody just is satisfied with the lower price. So that would be the approach. I sell you my stuff for 80% of the regular price only under the condition that you go on and sell my product to your own customers also at only 80% of your usual price. then you would have a different situation. So then you would have to evaluate the refund coupons or the price reductions for every different transaction in the chain. Okay, so that's probably a bit confusing because that's really the top level of the art. And if you don't, yeah, if you're not fine with it at the first glance, well, don't worry. It's just nice to have understood that price reduction coupons might be a bit complicated, and so that you have to be cautious when you have to deal with them. That should be enough for today. So thank you very much for listening, and don't forget, first, like the video. Second, tell others to subscribe to the channel if you like them. And if you don't like them, tell them to subscribe to the channel too, to make it a bit popular. Okay, thank you very much and see you again next time. Goodbye.